In hardly a generation, food allergies went from somewhat uncommon to absolutely commonplace. Peanuts, wheat, dairy, fish, the list goes on, making the EpiPen an everyday companion to thousands of Ontarians. Now, researchers at the Hospital for Sick Children hope to change all that by pursuing a cure for food allergies. Adelle Atkinson, clinical immunologist at Sick Kids, is here with more. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
We're going to find out. This is not just an academic discussion for you, but I don't want to. I'm burying the lead for now. Let's share these figures, facts and figures here with the people of Ontario here. 1 in 13 Canadians say they have a food allergy. 4 to 6% of children have been diagnosed with an allergy by a physician. 3 to 4% of adults have been diagnosed by a physician. Let's just start with the basics. An allergy is what?
So an allergy is the body's overwhelming immune response to a particular food protein. So we're going to talk about food allergy here. So there are particular proteins in food to which some individuals make antibodies in an abnormal way, and when that food is consumed, those antibodies recognize the protein and they stimulate an immune response, which culminates in the things we see in patients having an allergic reaction, such as hives, swelling, sometimes breathing difficulties, vomiting, diarrhea, etc. So it's really an abnormal, in some ways, immune response to a protein that's commonplace.
And how often is that response fatal?
It's a great question. Only a very small number of times,
Thankfully.
But of course, those times obviously are devastating. So the majority of kids and adults who have reactions to food will not have an overwhelmingly devastating immune response. However, there are a small percentage who do, and we don't always know who they are. So everyone has to be vigilant as if it could be them.
How do you find out that you've got an allergy?
So most importantly is the narrative, the history. So that's one of the privileges we have in medicine. We get to listen to stories all day long. So most of it is in the story. We take the story, we mix it with what we know about allergies as allergists, and then we have some tools that we can use to verify or refute the diagnosis. So we often start with skin testing, which many people will know, skin prick testing. So we can put sort of small drops of allergens on the skin. It looks like water, essentially, and we prick through them and we wait to see if there's an immune response. We also have at our disposal a blood test, which is also helpful. And again, these tests are not perfect. They contribute to helping us make the diagnosis, but they don't make the diagnosis. So we also have a blood test that also looks for antibodies in the blood called an immunocap. That's the trade name of the company we use. And then really the gold standard is, if we think it's appropriate, is to do a food challenge and see what happens. But of course, we would only do this in cases where we think the risk is quite low.
Food challenge means what?
So we would actually give the food in a graded way in our clinic under observation and see what happens.
Presumably people find out if they're allergic to something the hard way, right? They try something, they break out, and then they think, whoops,
absolutely,
we got to do something about this.
Absolutely.
Okay, next question, I'm sure you get it all the time, but we got to ask it anyway. When I was a kid, no one was allergic to anything. Nowadays, everybody's allergic to everything. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. We get asked that all the time because when we were going to school, you brought peanut butter sandwiches. They were kind of a staple in most houses because most kids would eat them. And now, of course, these things are all banned, etc. So it's probably multifactorial. So as you probably know, and lots of people talk about this, is that there's very little in the way of food allergies in the developing world. So it seems to be a first world problem. So you've got your genetics, and that we probably can't change. So if you have a parent or two parents who have a history of what we call atopic disease, allergic disease, and that would include allergies, asthma, eczema, you have a 40% chance with one parent and an 80% chance with two parents of developing something in that list.
So for your child, pick your parents very carefully.
Absolutely, right?
Okay, make
After
a note
the
of
fact,
that.
yeah.
Good, okay.
So what happens is you have an increased chance of having one of these things. Now, it may not be a food allergy, it may be asthma, maybe something else, but it could be a food allergy. So you definitely have an increased risk. So genetics we probably can't modify. What has been modified over time is we've changed our food. So we process our foods, we change the allergenicity, if you will. So by roasting peanuts, we think we actually potentiate the allergen. That's an example. We also consume different foods. The average North American probably consumes about 25 kilos of peanut in their lifetime, peanut butter in their lifetime. It's a lot of peanut. So it's exposure as well. But also, and importantly, it's probably introduction. When do we introduce? How do we introduce? And how is our immune system developing very early in life? And in developing countries, kids are exposed to infections, it's developing in a certain way. We don't have so much of that, and our immune system may be developing in a bit of a different way, putting kids more at risk.
You said roasting peanuts sometimes makes this happen?
Yes.
Did we not roast peanuts when we were kids?
So in a lot of peanut butters they do, but for example in China, where peanuts are essentially boiled, they have very little peanut allergy, which is sort of interesting. But it's not the only thing. I think it's multifactorial.
Okay, we know peanut butter. That's at the top of everybody's list nowadays, and peanut-free schools and all this kind of thing. What else is on the list now? The most common things.
So the most common ones in children would be peanuts and tree nuts. But if you go in order, milk and egg are more common, but more commonly outgrown, which is nice, which is why the incidence of allergies in children is actually higher than it is in adults, because children do, in many instances, outgrow milk, egg, and wheat. Those are three that they often outgrow.
Usually?
So it varies. We used to think that, most kids will outgrow these by the time they're 3 or 4. We're now seeing some of them persist a little longer, for sure, and outgrow them at a little bit of a later age. But in general, I would say the bulk of kids, it's in early childhood would outgrow them. Some kids will persist, a small number, and some will outgrow them in later childhood.
Does it make sense for parents with newborn kids, for example, to say, I don't know if my kid's allergic to peanut butter, but I'm not taking chances. This child of mine will never touch peanut butter in his or her life?
So that would actually be the opposite now, the opposite of what we now know one should do. As you probably know, the recommendations when we were all having our kids and maybe 10 years before that was, let's avoid all these things early in life, especially in high-risk kids. Let's take these high-risk kids with parents who are a sibling who have allergies, and let's not introduce milk until they're a year, eggs until they're 2 years, peanut protein until they're 3 years, fish until they're, I think, 2. There was all these rules. And I think the thinking was, without a lot of evidence, maybe the immune system will mature and then learn how to handle these allergens. What actually happened was the opposite. We now understand that the immune system probably needs to develop with those allergens on board and learn how to tolerate them as it matures as well. So from the LEAP study, which was a study that was done now, was published in 2015, March, they actually proved for the first time in a great randomized control trial that early introduction of peanut protein, explicit early introduction, and they did it between 4 and 11 months of age in high-risk kids, actually reduced the incidence of allergy as high as 70 to 80%, depending on which cohort you were in. It's really interesting. So early introduction is actually the way to go, and we know that now, and that's what we're counseling our families.
And I'm just trying to remember now, at 4 months old, how are you introducing peanut butter to a 4-month-old?
That's a good question. So 4-month-olds, they don't know what to do with their tongue. Peanut butter's thick, so they're not sure what to do with their tongue. So there's all different ways you can do it. You can water it down, you can give it in little amounts. They actually used a product called Bamba. It's an Israeli little snack that has peanut in it. They used that in the study. Some kids don't like the texture. It's like a marshmallowy texture, so they had other things. But yeah, you definitely, obviously you're not going to be giving peanuts to a kid before they're 3 because it's a choking hazard. So we have to be creative in how we get the protein into kids. But definitely we think now early exposure is the way to go.
Do you know a 15-year-old named Sam?
I do.
Who would that be?
That would be my 15-year-old son, Sam.
Sam has allergies.
He does. He has
What's he
a
allergic
peanut
to?
allergy. He's allergic to peanuts.
He is.
And thankfully,
How'd you
that's
find
it.
that out?
So that's a bit of a funny, embarrassing story. When he was 17 months old, I had just gone to give a lecture on anaphylaxis. I was already trained in allergy and immunology. I was working on staff at sick kids, and it was a Saturday, and I was giving a lecture on anaphylaxis at a conference. I came home and I said to my husband, who's also a physician, it's probably about time to give Sam some peanut protein. We haven't done it yet. In those days,
he's how old now at this point?
He's 15, and he was 17 months.
17 months
yeah.
at this point in the
we
story.
probably, I said, we probably should do that, right? And he's like, yeah. So anyway, we sat him down in his high chair. We put some peanut butter on some rye toast. We gave it to him, and he loved it. He was licking it off the toast and enjoying it. And then I saw a small hive on his face, and then I saw another one, and then I saw another one, and I said to my husband, I think he's having an allergic reaction. He said, you think he's having an allergic? I said, yeah, I think he's really having an allergic reaction.
Almost instantly?
Yeah, probably within a couple minutes.
Okay.
So of course, I didn't have anything available. He was happily eating it. So I called my neighbor. I said, do you have any Benadryl? She goes, why? I said, I think Sam's having an allergic reaction to peanut. She goes, oh my goodness. And so she went into a panic. I said, no. And I looked over at him with the phone. In those days, phones were still attached to the wall. And I said, actually, I think it's going away. I think we're good. So it actually went away on its own, but that was the beginning of the journey now. He went for skin testing. It was positive. He carries an auto-injector intermittently, unfortunately, but we're trying to work on that.
Sorry, I haven't heard that term before. You mean an EpiPen?
Yes.
An auto-injector is an EpiPen?
Yes. EpiPen is the trade name. That's the company name.
Okay.
And auto-injector would be, because there's other devices as well.
Gotcha. So he sometimes carries it, sometimes doesn't. Mm-hmm. Has he ever gotten himself in trouble?
No, he hasn't. He's been very lucky. He's very good at asking and talking about what's in foods, et cetera, and avoiding foods he knows are potentially contaminated. So he's been very, very good.
And has not had peanuts since that time when he was 17 months old?
Exactly, has not.
Ugh, He doesn't know what he's missing, does he?
I know.
It's fabulous.
I know.
Peanut
Maybe he'll
butter's the
outgrow
best.
it. We're really hoping he'll be one of the ones that'll outgrow it.
He's 15 now, though.
Yeah, well, there is about 20 to 25% of teenagers who will outgrow their peanut allergy by teenage years. So really hoping he might be one of them.
Interesting. Okay. Let's talk about, I mean, you gave the example of Sam there where he broke out in hives. Didn't seem to be in distress, though, right? He was okay with the thing?
Fine.
What's the other end of the spectrum when you demonstrate an allergic reaction to something?
Right. So anaphylaxis, I think, is what
Anaphylaxis,
yeah.
okay.
So anaphylaxis would be the most extreme end of the response, of an allergic response to a particular food, or it can be to other things, of course, as well, medication, insect stings, etc. But as we talk about food, so it would be an overwhelming immune response that the body has to a particular allergen. It, the ones that we know kids are allergic to, it can be really to anything but milk, egg, wheat, peanuts, tree nuts, shellfish, fish, etc., sesame are all on the list. And this would be a situation where you clinically would probably see a child who started to look in distress. They often develop a rash, which is hive-like. It's usually itchy, but not always. They could develop angioedema, which is sort of swelling, often around the airway. They can start to wheeze. They can become lethargic. They can become unresponsive.
You've seen all these
breathing
things happen, I assume?
difficulties. Yeah. Yeah, blood pressure problems, they can drop their blood pressure, the list goes on, diarrhea, vomiting, etc. And a combination of all of those things. This is an emergency, it has to be dealt with immediately, and the life-saving medication for this is adrenaline or epinephrine, same thing, which are contained in the auto-injectors. So it's so important that as soon as somebody recognizes that this is a possibility, they must give the EpiPen, the auto-injector, whatever they have. It has to be given right away because it's the only life-saving treatment for this. And we know that patients do better when it's given very, very quickly, as opposed to waiting a few minutes, wondering what you're dealing with. Then the reaction can actually get out of control, where even epinephrine may not work.
I presume there's no harm in giving it, even if it's not an allergic reaction. The harm is in not giving it if there's an allergic reaction?
Especially in children.
Okay.
If you'd rather be wrong in a child and have given it, they'll get a fast heart rate for a few minutes, they'll feel a little anxious, but the half-life's very short, that will go away, and it would be, nobody would ever fault you for giving it and not having needed to, because it is life-saving, for sure.
Do most people who are allergic to something know how severe their allergies are to something?
That's a good question, and people ask us that all the time. So I think the patients that come to us and have had a history of anaphylaxis, they know that likely the next time they would have a similar reaction. I would say the majority of people don't for sure know what might happen the next time they eat the food, because if they come and they've had a mild reaction, but they truly are allergic and need to avoid it, we can't tell them that the next time they have it, it'll be exactly the same. It might be related to how much they ate by accident, or on purpose, but hopefully by accident. So there's all kinds of things that feed into that. It could be the situation at the time, it could be related to whether they have asthma. So there's actually right now no way to really predict how serious they might be, but it is one of the areas of research that we're working on, is to look at, are there any biologic markers that might be able to predict those people? So we could actually have a specific plan for them versus the next person.
What's delabeling?
Oh, delabeling, that's one of my favorite topics. Delabeling is the notion that if a child is, or an adult, if anyone is labeled with a food allergy, we as allergists must be absolutely sure they truly have that food allergy, because the burden of illness and the anxiety that comes from having that label and having a food allergy is not to be underestimated. I think for people that don't have this, it may be not as clear, but I see families where children are afraid to go. They don't go to sleepovers, they don't go on school trips, they wear gloves to school. I even have some patients I have to send to anxiety clinic because of all this stuff that kind of comes with having an allergy to a food. So number one, we have to be sure. So what we are committed to in our clinic, and we have the capacity and the skill set in our group, as well as our resources like our Emerge to do this, is to ensuring that we challenge all of the kids where it's really questionable to make sure that we delabel the ones that truly are not allergic but have that label. So for example, in clinic this week, we did quite a few food challenges, and every single person passed. So everybody is now eating the food, hopefully. Please be eating the food we told you to eat. And we're now doing days of food challenges where we'll do, 12, 14 kids. And, we had a day a couple weeks ago where only one kid actually truly was allergic to the food that we were challenging to. The others were fine. So we're really committed to making sure that the population that are labeled truly are allergic, so we can manage them properly and get rid of some of that anxiety for families.
Let's look ahead. Sick Kids Hospital's got a campaign called In Only 10 Years. What is it you hope to achieve in only 10 years?
So it's a lofty goal, but we want to talk about having a cure. We want to talk about having
cure
a cure
for allergies.
for allergies in 10 years. Now this will be multi-pronged. because I think it's everything from what can we modify early on to just stop it from happening at all. And I think with the new prevention guidelines, we published some in Canada in 2013, and now with the new LEAP study, we understand a lot more than we did when I was training about when we should be introducing foods into children's diets. So I think we start with prevention, and then if we still end up with children who have some allergies, some of the research that we're doing at Sick Kids is now focusing on other things that might be useful for those kids moving forward. So I talked a little bit about a molecule. So there's a couple of our researchers are working in adults and in children on a molecule that might be a marker of anaphylaxis. So this molecule, if it contributes to anaphylaxis, what if you could block it? What if someone could take a pill and block this particular biologic marker, such that if the child was accidentally exposed, nothing would happen or something mild would happen. So, for example, looking at introducing things like baked milk and egg, for example. So some of our researchers have done studies looking at introduction of baked foods. So if you actually heat a food enough, you can actually change the shape of the protein, and the immune system recognizes it in a different way. So we have kids who are allergic to milk and egg who can actually tolerate baked milk and egg, which opens up all kinds of foods in the home. The other kids can have those foods, and we're finding those kids are outgrowing their allergies more quickly. So these are all things moving in the right direction. One thing that happened through simple observation, and now one of our scientists is collaborating with the gastrointestinal service at our hospital, was that kids who've undergone liver transplant, there was a group of them that were developing new food allergies that they didn't have before their liver transplant. So now people are looking at what is it about their immune system when we do this liver transplant, and then we give them certain medications because of the liver transplant that is actually modifying their immune system. So all these things help us understand why certain cells develop in a certain way and cause or don't cause allergic manifestations later on. So there's all kinds of exciting research going on that will, I think, help us get to that goal. We've just recently recruited a new scientist from Austria who's going to be doing some really interesting work helping us with even better clinical tools that are now currently still in the research side of things that we can use clinically eventually to make decisions about who to do food challenges on, who's it safe to do, because our skin testing and our current blood test, they're okay, but they're not perfect. So exciting things going on there too. So I think there's lots of room for us to reach this goal. It's lofty, but you have to have a goal, and that's a good one, I think, to have.
And is it just you at Sick Kids, or are you in collaboration with other hospitals, or how are you doing
Absolutely. So there's a desensitization study that our group is working on right now to milk, and we're collaborating with Vancouver and McGill on that. So absolutely, very open to collaboration. We're collaborating within the hospital with other people that aren't in our specialty specifically, like the gastroenterologist, for example, and then with other hospitals across Canada and around the world.
The cure that you're looking for, you mentioned you might be able to take a tablet at some point. Is a vaccine part of the solution here as well?
So people have looked at vaccines, for example, to desensitize. So a number of years ago, some people in the US were doing some trials looking at vaccines to potentially desensitize folks to peanut, and they didn't go as well. Some kids it made a difference, some it didn't. That's not something we're working on right now, but down the road, who knows? There might be a way to change what was in the vaccine to allow it to be able to act on the immune system in a different way. So that is something I think down the road that might be a possibility, in conjunction with all of these other trials as well.
Just so I understand the goal better, though, is the point here, you can't get rid of allergies, but you may be able to treat allergies, or the goal here is we're going to make allergies disappear? Which is it?
So I think the goal is we would like to cure allergies. I think because of genetics, there's always going to be the predisposition in some families, and we can't change the genetics. So really, what we can affect is probably from birth on. So I think it's going to be prevention, and try to get to the point where our population, we start to see the numbers just plummet. If we do our job properly, they should just plummet. For anybody who squeaks through because of things that we couldn't have understood or don't understand yet, or until we get to the cure, have a really defined way to manage them, and to have very specific, engineered plans for them that aren't just the big blind everybody has to avoid, but have another sort of a more tailor-made approach to each patient. So I think at the end of the day, we can't change the genetics yet, but I would hope that we would be able to completely prevent if possible. And then if a kid does develop cure it perhaps with some sort of a pill. Who knows? Who knows what it might look like in a few years? Because when you look at where we've come from in the last decade, it's unbelievable. It's a really exciting time to be in our field. And I couldn't have imagined this when we were training. Everything was quite stable for a long time. We were doing our work. It was good work, et cetera. And then people have just done some studies that have completely transformed the way we manage patients in the last 10 years. I could not have imagined it. It's a really exciting time.
Clinical trials happening now?
Clinical trials are happening. Patients are being recruited. For example, for the study looking at this biologic marker, any patient who comes into our emerge with anaphylaxis, we get notified, samples are taken. Patients are being recruited into, or soon will be recruited into the milk desensitization trial.
Hard to get people to participate in this stuff?
No, actually. People are excited to participate. I have families sometimes randomly emailing me saying, hey, my kid has such and such. If there's ever a trial going on in this area, would love to be part of it. People are excited about it. It's amazing, actually.
Does it affect a child's mental well-being to participate in these kinds of things where you're almost encouraging them to have an allergic reaction to something as part of your testing?
Oh, for example, if you do desensitization, it's a great question. One of the things to get any study passed, as you probably know, any study passed on humans is you have to show that you actually won't do that. So lots and lots of checks and balances are put into place around how patients are informed, how they consent, who consents for them if they're underage, depending on what age they are, how much should they consent, et cetera, to make sure that we do everything we can to ensure that we do no harm, that there is no harm done here and nothing different or especially worse than what would be sort of normal care, what would be the average care if they didn't come to this trial. So all of this is mitigated as much as it can be. And at the end of the day, safety regulations are unbelievable in these trials. So, but patients will know that if we're potentially going to give you this food in small amounts, they would know before they signed off that they would like to be part of it, that they potentially might have a reaction. Having said that, patients still want to be part of these trials, I think partly for their own kids and partly to further the knowledge and what we understand about the field.
Well, good luck with the work.
Thank you.
I feel I should be asking you to sing something before you leave, though.
I know.
You know, you're kind of three-letter. Her name's Adelle Atkinson. And
Yes,
your name's
yeah.
Adelle Atkinson.
Yeah,
and
I know.
You probably get teased
I know,
about
and
that
people
all the time.
mix us up all the time.
I can see why.
Except that I'm 25 years older or more.
You sing just as well, I'm sure. Adelle Atkinson, clinical immunologist, Hospital for Sick Kids. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.